And so we return to Yosef's clinic to find out what happened to that beast man. Spoilers, it's the same thing that happens to everybody that comes here. And soon enough we'll see what that is once we go through the other way to Yosef's place.
Oh, hello. You're all right. Very good. He's safe with me now. I presume you're to thank? The treatment is going well. Stabilized, for the most part. Fascinating, really. Here you are, as promised. Oh, thank goodness you came. Be a dear. Find me some more.
Now that's a laugh you can trust, isn't it? I know I made that joke quite a bit, but I do love that laugh an awful lot. It's just, there's something funny about the sort of off-tone sort of cackling that's sort of witch-like. I just love it so much. It's goofy.
There may yet, if you find so please.
But yeah, like I said, this part we'll find out what actually is going on behind the door. But to continue my point about the Oath runes, because I picked that up last part, most of them are pretty useless. There's only one that's reasonably decent with its effect, short of the two in the DLC, and that is the Hunter of Hunters rune, which is quite a difficult rune to get. So you have to fight what is arguably the hardest NPC in the game to fight. But I'll probably be doing that once I enter the DLC. But things like the Impurity rune, where they raise your HP during multiplayer, like by 2 or something, or increase like HP regen by 2 or something, it's like, who fucking cares? That's useless. So, in a sense, I can understand why they wanted to make it so weak, because they wanted it to be a choice of Covenant, not a choice of effect, but by their nature of not really balancing them out all that well, pretty much everybody goes Hunter of Hunters to get the stamina regeneration. So, it's honestly, it's not very well thought out. And it's a shame, because I can see what they were trying to do with it. They should look over what they do and see, like, is this properly balanced? Which, all too often, FromSoft don't really do. Which is why they make mistakes like this. So this is the lower area of the Forbidden Woods. Again, as I said before, it's not really so much a villagey area where people live, as more of a sort of dumping ground and graveyard. Where there's shit tons of snakes. In little snake orgies, because that's what snakes do. Look it up. Don't look it up, it's actually quite disgusting. But yeah. This actual area, even by itself, just this bottom area with all the gravestones and paths and such, there is so much in here that is basically just paths, items, and snakes that there really isn't an awful lot to say. There is a bits and pieces and it leads to important things, but for the most part, there's a lot of just this, so there'll be moments where I talk about what's going on, strategies and so on, and yeah, these guys can quite easily poison you, so hope you've got your antidotes. But then there'll be other times when I'm just speaking generally, because there really isn't an awful lot to say. The general path down here, if you just want to get to the bottom of the level, just follow that path and just race down, and you'll pretty much just get there. But there's an awful lot of things like Madman's Knowledge, upgrade material, and even some quite important runes. There's one that boosts your frenzy resistance, which is pretty well recommended for getting. But there are also a lot of points of no return, and you can very easily get lost here. It's the flip side of just having a big open area like Huntsman's Copse in Dark Souls 2, or just a long corridor of death like Shrine of Amana. This is sort of... you could argue it's a place where levels just over-designed, where there's just so many winding paths that all look the same, more or less, that it's just really hard to get your bearings. And to me that's bad design. But for the most part, Forbidden Woods isn't too bad, because if you genuinely don't want to go through all that crap, you can just rush to down the path like a corridor. Although you miss out an awful lot on doing that, so it's like, it's not really recommended to do that either. And yeah, those big snake tank guys, I don't show it here because I was just cheesing everything with oil urns, but they can be pretty intimidating at first, but there is a way to deal with them on their own individually. They like to spit poison projectiles at you, so what you can do is bait that out, and then just close the distance. I'll do that in a moment. But first there's this encounter, 3 snake dudes guarding a very important item. Now, despite my use of the Beast Roar, I would recommend you don't do what I did and get completely surrounded. Because as you can see, I very nearly croaked it. Not a good start. These guys have a hell of... They attack incredibly quickly. Have like 360 radius attack because of all of the Resident Evil 4 things coming out of their head, or snakes in this case. So, generally best to keep your distance and hit with ranged attacks. And there is the first chunk you can get in the game. Although you need 3, so it doesn't really matter too much that you pick it up. Now this is where the Frenzy resist rune is, which is, again, I highly recommend picking it up, because Frenzy is the worst thing in this game. And while you can just go down a straight path and, like, deal with these 2 firing projectiles at you, you could just do this instead, because it's substantially easier. Again, take your time, and take advantage of your surroundings. A lot of enemies in this game really can't deal with you attacking from a distance or from like a higher level, as it were, like being too high up or too far down. And again, great volumes of water serve as a bulwark guarding sleep and an augur of the Eldritch Truth, emphasizing that the lake that Yharnam and pretty much the areas around Yharnam are focused around is a very important thing that you'll be dealing with later. Not as late as you might think, though. So again, that's where you pick it up. I'm not sure if I've talked about Frenzy before, but it is essentially bleed on steroids, and it's triggered by enemies either grabbing you or even as much as looking at you. So you can see why it's such a hated mechanic in this game, and why it's so important to get a lot of Frenzy resist. Which is pretty much the downside of getting church gear. None of the church gear has very good Frenzy resistance. In fact, it has shit Frenzy resistance, if you actually look it up. Like, I'm not even sure the chess piece have like any more than 10 Frenzy resist, which is absurd. So yeah, but these are needed. Having a rifle spear is actually a really good way of dealing with these things, because the rifle spear has a charged R2 that has some ridiculous range, because you essentially, once you charge it up, you basically do like a running stab that makes an already quite long weapon have even longer range, and is very much recommended for skill builds. Although it doesn't have too bad blood tinge either. So yeah, it can be as easy as that to deal with the big snake tanks. Once you know that their size doesn't intimidate anymore. And this is me just looking for whether there are any side paths I missed, because I don't generally like to go through this area more than once. I mean, you can, once you've unlocked the shortcuts, it's fairly easy to get around. And I do, after the set, use this place for farming Arcane gems. This is the first place we can really do that, short of using the Chalice dungeons. But that's not until a bit later. But generally, I don't like to hang around this place. It's, again, it's easy to get lost and lose your way. It's enormous, and there isn't really a lot that you really want besides, like, the sea runes that boost your resistances. Although the ones for slow poison resistance or rapid poison resist, I generally don't bother with. Once you're out of Old Yharnam and you have a lot of vitality, slow poison stops being a big deal. Whereas rapid poison, which essentially is more like bleed from Dark Souls 1, I've rarely had that trigger. And it's more of an issue you face in the Chalice dungeons than in the main game. So this is actually very close to the actual boss of this area, although I don't actually go and fight that boss till much later, as you can probably tell from the time. But there's a shortcut that you open up here from the other side which allows you to go through that area, although it's frankly useless. And this is where you pick up the weaker clockwise metamorphosis rune. Those runes can stack. They're not like Dark Souls 2 where you can't stack rings of the same effect that are of the same type. You can stack those runes if you want. So it is worth picking things up like that. But it ends up being a pretty useless shortcut because you get a much better one later. That is closer to the more centralized one, which allows you to get from the lantern at the top straight down to the boss at the bottom. Thankfully there's not many snakes around at the bottom level, it's just a load of the sewer guys. Pigs again, so enjoy your glorious fisting. And a new enemy that we haven't really seen yet, but is quite important, especially if you want to farm elemental gems of the triangular shape. Thankfully you've been spared just how much time I've spent farming elemental gems for this build outside of the Chalice dungeons is a nightmare. An absolute nightmare. It does make me think they didn't really... It makes me wonder whether they really thought people would do Arcane builds like this. Or whether they would use things like the Hunter tools exclusively if they did so. Which is weird, because they've had elemental weapon builds since Demon Souls. But in Bloodborne they're almost an afterthought because of the nature of the blood gems. Which is disappointing, but at least there are places outside the Chalice dungeons you can actually go and spend the time building up weapons like this. Although, for the most part, you're restricted to fire and bolt weapons by the nature of how easy they are to get in comparison to arcane ones. Which I think, at least in the main game anyway, are almost exclusively triangle and radial. If there are even any radial ones around. Annoying, but there you go. This is me just farting around doing a bit of exploring. Down in this bottom level there's a few extra things you pick up. There's a set that I actually missed the headpiece off because it's actually... Well, the insinuation from where the item placement is that the person who owned the set had their head cut off and then their body was kicked down here or something. And this is it. Since the snake stops screeching. The Graveguard set. Which, it emphasises who the password gatekeeper was, and of course the owner of the Graveguard set was the guy around the Forbidden Lands, although why he's dead, why he's had his head cut off or something. I'm not too sure. There are some bits of this game that I'm like, yes, this is really interesting, and then there are other parts where I'm like, eh. And to be honest, the story of Doris the Graveguard is not one that I find particularly interesting. I'm not sure many people do, to be honest. This emphasises just the sheer amount of owl-like coverage the heads of these guys have. They can attack you pretty much from behind or on the side. It's really annoying. Well, if you're having trouble with that, one of the things you can do is just bait their really telegraphed grab attack. But here is actually where the new enemy gets introduced, if I recall correctly. And they are quite interesting indeed in terms of just how different they are to the rest of the enemies in this area, as well as compared to most of the enemies in the game, they are more like the brain suckers, which should give you an indication as to what sort of theme they're going for with them. And there he is. Little blue bubble-headed alien. Or so it would seem. This is what's called a celestial emissary, and this is where you will be, if you're like me, wanting to avoid the chalice dungeons to do your arcane farming. This is where you'll be getting a lot of arcane gems of the triangle variety. Oh, I don't actually think there's many other varieties of arcane besides droplet gems, which is annoying. And as you can see, they're not just flailing monstrosities. They have arcane power too. They sort of... The point of the celestial emissaries is that they can commune with the cosmos. They don't seem to have any... They seem to... They're almost always hostile. Almost always, anyway. They do a fuckload of damage with those attacks, though. But they still have, like, the ability to commune with the arcane. The insinuation is with them is that they're sort of a catalyst or a vessel for which the people in the choir specifically can actually commune with the Great Ones, as the Communion Rune discusses, if I recall correctly. And here you can see just how much farming I did for all the gemstones. Awful lot of waning ones. But that's where you can pick up arcane gems. I'm going to open up a shortcut that leads down here eventually, but what it essentially is that you go down the shortcut and just head right down this little alcove area. And then just kill the celestial emissaries and then just hunter's mark out. And just repeat the process ad nauseum until you get the gems you want. Which will almost always be triangular gems. I don't think I've seen them drop any other. Although they might drop some waning or radial. It's been a long time since I've done this. This, of course, happened weeks ago. But, yeah. This is the bottom area. Before I actually go and do the boss, though, I did mention we were going to find out what Yosefka's been up, or fake Yosefka's been up to all this time. So once I unlock the shortcut, that's what ends up going on. Then there's this cheeky bugger hiding behind the trees, just ready to ruin your day. Once again, showing off the knockback power of Orco Fabriatus, which is why it is one of the most awesome hunter tools in the game. And lo and behold, we are back here. So that should make it a bit more evident as to how useful those two shortcuts are and how a lot of the other shortcuts in this area are they just don't really compare. Normally I'd advise running past this guy. But, I felt a bit spiteful after all this hassle. So I decided he needed a bit of murder in his life. And that's about that. Once you unlock that shortcut, it becomes a very easy run straight to the boss, which is what I ended up doing at the end of this. And the boss itself is it's one that originally I was not a big fan of when I saw it, because it looked very, at least on the surface, like the gang squad from Dark Souls 2, which if you've seen, you'll know just how absurd that fight is. Thankfully, it's not quite as badly designed as that. But that'll be for another time. So right now, we're making our way to Yosefka. And I mentioned that That side area in the first part, which I skipped near where the dogs are being caged, that's where you go. There's also a fairly useful nourishing gem, so if you're having trouble or you just can't be bothered farming a lot of the elemental gems that you want, or you have a split damage weapon like the Blades of Mercy or what's another early one, the Tonitrus, you can just get a nourishing gem, which nourishing gems boost all of your attack, so they are perfect for split damage weapons. With weapons which have blood attack, it doesn't matter too much, because blood attack is treated very similar to, in fact almost identically to physical gems. So any physical attack gem will boost that damage, both blood and physical. But for things like the Blade of Mercy and Tonitrus, nourishing gems are kind of what you want. Or split damage weapons are in this game is that, for the most part, with the exception of the Ligarius Wheel and the Holy Moonlight Sword, which have their own arcane buffs similar to the Tonitrus, split damage weapons almost invariably favour the physical damage over the elemental. You get very little scaling from the arcane side. If you still want to make that sort of damage work, the best thing you can do is get nourishing gems which boost your physical and arcane at the same time, or you get odd gems. What odd gems do is they're not percentage based, they are flat damage increases. Which, when you get like 50 extra damage from like 40 arcane, flat gems are generally how you actually make that sort of damage considerable and not shit. As you can see, there's this enormous Snake Eater style ladder that goes down to the Forbidden Woods. And there's an awful lot of corpses that seem to be just dumped here. Now the insinuation is that the Scourge has just got so bad over the years that time after time after time this has formed a sort of mass grave that leads straight down to the Forbidden Woods. Because again, Yharnam is built on other civilizations, particularly the Thumeru one, and has faced multiple hunts before, so this is you seeing sort of remnants of these horrible scourges. And it leads straight back here. Which looks awfully familiar, does it not? This leads straight back to where we started the game. Except now, it's a little shadier. It does look very nice. I do like the little touches that they change the overlay of the area depending on what time of day it is based on your game progression. There is one exception to this rule that I'll probably be pointing out once the set comes. But there is also a justification for that, I suppose.
Oh, hello. You made it. Find any survivors? Or only beasts? Tell anyone who's human about Yusefka's clinic. I will take proper care of them. They're in your hands, and soon mine.
Yes.
If you find any, you can, please.
I'll get my hands all over them. Yep, good old creep Yosefka. So, now that we've opened up that path, we can actually go around the building and enter through the back way. Feel free to make all the jokes you want. And we'll actually see what she's been up to, which is quite interesting indeed. And again, it gives you a bit more information as to what the choir specifically are like. For if you remember the motto of the choir, the sky and the cosmos are one, you'll perhaps see why they are so aligned or affiliated with the, or associated I should say actually, with the celestial emissaries. And for those of you who don't know, an emissary is something akin to an ambassador or someone who sort of facilitates discussion between people of different countries and such. And in this case, it's with the cosmos. Which should give you an indication as to why the choir perhaps are responsible for these things. Which should perhaps explain why there are so many celestial emissaries here, and not so many humans. I like how this one here is just sort of heading off over to where Yosefka is, like he's just heading off to the management to make a complaint. I wonder who sounds like that sort of personality, or indeed, whether there's one who behaves like this. This is what becomes of the guy from the Forbidden Woods that you send here, and indeed anybody you send here. As you can clearly see, people are sort of strapped down to the chairs and turned into emissaries. So it's not really fair to call them aliens. And again, the communion room. The pursuit of communion. So yeah, very clearly affiliated with the church, and of course with the choir, based on the nature of all the not aliens running around. So let's actually go and see what she has to say for herself, eh?
Ah, moonlit scents. How did you worm your way in here? Very unfortunate. I had such high hopes for you. Well, I won't make any excuses. Would you mind leaving us alone? Things need not change. You'll do the rescuing, and I'll do the saving. But if you refuse to leave... Oh well. I've always wanted to try my hand on a hunter.
Again, more lovely witch cackling. To basically say it now, I'm not going to kill Yosefka here for a very important reason. It's better to come later after certain main story progression's done. But I did want to show off what she could do.
This won't hurt a bit. I'll soon have you right as rain.
She has the very nasty repeating pistol, a threaded cane, as well as some of the hunter tools that I've been using as well. Quite amusingly, the tentacle one, which I think is quite apt for a creep like Yosefka. And like a lot of the NPC hunters, she's very spongy and takes a lot of damage, and she can deal as much as she dishes out. But again, I don't actually want to fight her. From what I've heard, if you do this, you make her hostile for good. And until a certain point in the story progression, you basically just can't talk to her. So if you still want to send people to Yosefka for some reason, you can't do that if you go and do that. Although, from what I hear, that she has some unique dialogue for you going and seeing what she does and then just leaving. Sort of like an insinuation of affiliation or implicit acceptance of what she's doing. This is what happened to the real Yosefka we talked to at the very start of the game. If you kill this emissary, she drops Yosefka's blood vial. But this is what I really wanted. The invitation to my favourite place in the game, and the last really gothic area of the game. From this point on, it pretty much just becomes Lovecraftian, which I personally... I like Lovecraft, I like gothic stuff, but the way Bloodborne handles the two of them together, there's sort of like an audible, sort of like very noticeable clunk between it going gothic to going Lovecraft. It doesn't really marry the two together as well as it should, really. But hey, what can you do? I just wish they made more use of the gothic elements, to be honest. Because as I've mentioned before, they don't really seem to contextualize or do a lot with the supernatural elements of the game, as opposed to the cosmic Lovecraftian ones. But that's it. That's enough arsing around for now. It's time to rush to the boss. And it, as you've probably already guessed from my discussion about the gang squad, it's a multiple enemy boss fight. But it's a multiple enemy boss fight done right. That is to say, the enemies behave very, very differently. They don't all just go and bum rush you, like the gang squad do, with one guy at the back plonking really annoying great arrows. No, instead, they behave very differently in a way which allows them to be quite easily controlled once you know what they do. And like with any sort of encounter with multiple enemies, it's best to keep them separated. And you'll see me try to do that, and yeah, sort of get it, but no, I'll explain when I actually get into the fight. But in any case, good multiple enemy boss fight encounters shouldn't be trivialized by your damage, but also shouldn't be so insurmountable that you're getting blindsided by fucking everything as soon as you try to attack. This actually strikes a good balance, and I think a lot more highly of this boss fight than the one that follows it. Although the one that follows it is also not as bad as it can be. Again, like with Vicar Amelia, that boss depends very much on your damage. Sort of a DPS check again. And here, just like in Dark Souls 1, you can get some roast pig by using the environment to your advantage. Oh, for sharp and I think heavy gems, those are gems that increase the strength or skill scaling of a weapon. I generally don't use them all that much, but they essentially allow you to make certain weapons fit your build a bit better, in the same way you can make, in Demon Souls and Dark Souls 3, make a weapon more strength scaling or more dex scaling. But, alas, because I'm not either of those builds, I don't really make much use of them here. And this, funnily enough, this rather ominous arena-looking area is an arena for a boss fight. With all these giant tombstones. So, already not looking too good. You have 3 guys to fight, which do a pretty decent amount of damage together. And you have one guy in the back, plonking fireballs at you, the track. All in all, not a great start. But, the ways which you can make this manageable is, of course, as you can see here, using the enormous gravestone to separate the guy throwing fireballs from the more melee-oriented units. And while I don't show it there, you can also abuse the iframes of visceral attacks to avoid damage when they're all grouped together. Ideally, you do not want them grouped together. But sometimes it doesn't work. Another benefit to this fight over something like the Gang Squad is that these guys are actually quite easy to interrupt the attacks of. Like, you only need to shoot them or hit them and they will generally back away. The general idea is, using that to your advantage, you do a lot of damage exclusively, generally, to one, typically this guy here, and kill him before they really power up. I failed to do this, and you can see how problematic it can make things. But once you've done that, the fight gets progressively easier. It starts off quite difficult, and then gets, depending on your interpretation, generally easier, because you have fewer enemies to deal with. Once they do this, their moveset starts to expand a bit more, and they start doing weirder things like that. They get their weird extendo arm Helen style, or Mr. Fantastic. And they can do that, which is very annoying. Which again is why you want to keep the melee guy closer to you, really. To stop him doing things like that. Although that's only really in the second phase. Now ideally, he should be dead before you even get there. But since I didn't do that, I got juggled all over the place. The flamethrower guy in particular can be quite dangerous, and indeed he can pretty much kill you, more so perhaps than any of the others, because He has a flamethrower, which again just does lots of tick damage and doesn't really stagger you, so it can climb up very, very quickly. And he'll attack through his mace. But if you do this... I just realised there's a lot of audio desync, I'll go and sort that in a minute. You can see it becomes very easy to do lots of damage to them quickly because you're just abusing the AI and that they will want to dodge as soon as they get hit. And now he's using the grave to try and avoid damage. Quite interesting. But yeah, this is pretty much it after you've dealt with the first one. Once there's only one left, and it doesn't matter which one you leave alive, they get one final trick which can be very, very nasty if it catches you out. And he was just about to do that, I think, then. But I interrupted him before he could do it, and he never gets to do it, so... Hopefully, you will never see the move, and it will never ruin your day. But generally it summons snakes from the ground that track you, and basically just knock you on your ass. There we go. In one fell swoop, 3 shadows are dead. The Blood Rapture rune that you get insinuates that they're from Canehurst, especially since that 2 out of the 3 have katanas, which is associated with the Vile Bloods, as you'll find out. But the Carrier of the Child of Blood, or the Queen of Blood, is not necessarily the one associated with Canehurst, as you'll find out if you go to the Chalice Dungeons. Again, with the Chalice Dungeons, I think I'll just show off the bosses that are unique, rather than just showing off all of them, because, oh, they are just... It's the game trying to be Diablo, I suppose, and failing. That's what I'll say about it here. And a final mention, we get this peculiar creature in the area we're about to go to. That creature is called the Garden of Eyes. And considering how important eyes have been all this time, it should probably give you an indication as to what sort of area we're going into. We finally made it to Byrgenwerth. A surprisingly small area, actually, but we'll get to see that next time. So when we come back, it'll be Byrgenwerth and the aftermath of you dealing with what's in the lake. So until then, bye-bye.